Testing. If you can hear my voice, clap once. If you can hear my voice, clap twice. Excellent. If you can hear my voice, clap 3 times. Thank you. Thank you for coming today to our rally for the Montana Constitution. Yeah. Woo! I'm Chris Glenn, and I'm a member of Northern Plains Resource Council. We are a grassroots conservation and family agriculture group founded in 1972, the same year of our Montana Constitution was written. Yeah! By Montanans just like you. We are just one of the organizations that have joined together to pull this rally together. And I want to thank Montana conservation voters, especially for their work in leading the charge in this rally. Let's give them and all of the supporting organizations a hand. Yeah! It takes all of us to protect our Constitution and our state. We are here today, as I said, to express our support for the Montana Constitution and to rally to protect the freedoms and the rights enshrined within it. Montanans are fortunate to have one of the strongest state constitutions in the nation. And we are fiercely proud of it. Yes, fiercely. For more than half a century, it has faithfully protected our rights, our freedoms, and our people. Let's hear another big cheer for the Constitution! Our state constitution guarantees Montanans at least 17 more rights than the U.S. Constitution. 17, can you believe that? And all of those rights work together to bring us a healthy democracy. Our rights include the right to know. That means we want to know and we get to know what our government is doing, ensuring accountability and transparency for the decisions our government is making on our behalf. Our Constitution includes checks and balances to ensure our courts are fair and impartial. This is especially important as we see bills this session aiming to force judges to declare a political party in judicial elections. Boo! Dangerous, this is dangerous. Injecting politics into our courts would open the door to corruption and create a situation where judges are answering to political bosses and wealthy donors rather than the law. No, right, no. We depend on our government to be accountable to us, to we the people. Politicizing the courts would diminish that accountability and weaken the separation between our 3 branches of government. Does anybody really think that we need more politics in our lives? No. And especially in our courts? No. We want justice from our courts, not politics. So let's hear it. Justice, not politics. Justice, not politics. Justice, not politics. Justice, not politics. Yeah. And in light of that, I'm going to introduce our first speaker. Riley Summers Flanagan is the founder and executive director of Upper Seven Law, a nonpartisan, nonprofit law firm dedicated to holding the powerful accountable. She's a 5th-generation Montanan who grew up in Missoula and spent her summers on the family's working ranch in Absaroka. Welcome to Riley.
Thank you so much, Chris. Who here loves the Montana Constitution? I have to confess to you all that it is pretty exciting to me to be in a room where this many people want to celebrate a legal document. You all probably know that I spend most of my time in front of a courtroom and in front of judges, and that what we do at Upper 7 is we sue oftentimes the state and sometimes other actors to enforce the Montana Constitution and the many rights that Chris just described. So today, I have this incredibly fortunate opportunity to get to talk with you about what is truly my favorite subject. And I get to do it right alongside two people that I respect an extraordinary amount, so I am excited for you to get to hear from them as well. Former Governor Mark Roscoe and former District Court Judge Jim Manley. So, what is a constitution? Anybody have any ideas? It's protections for the American people. It's protections for the American people. Anything else? It's a social contract. What's your name?
Jan Strout, Montana now.
Jan! I know you, Jan.
I know you.
Anyway, Jan has the best definition, maybe of all, a social contract. I love that. Protection for legal rights is really good too. Anybody else? Yes, Jane. It's a framework. It's a framework within which we build all of the other laws that we have. I love that. Thank you. Okay, so I like to think about a constitution. All of these things are exactly right. You all are experts. You're amazing. I like to think of it sometimes as a promise that we make to our future selves, an agreement that we make among ourselves, a social contract, a framework that we have built that preserves our rights. So, what is it when we make this agreement? Why do we need to make this agreement to our future selves? The reason that we have to do this is that sometimes we find ourselves tempted in moments when there is so much power to be had in the world, when there is money that we want to accrue money, we want to accrue power. These are the things that drive us sometimes to want to overstep the bounds, right? That sometimes we find ourselves in these situations in which it is difficult to control our whims and our impulses. And I bring this up because that's one of the reasons why we create a constitution, is that we want to make this agreement with ourselves that will hold us to a set of principles and that will keep us engaged with one another according to a set of rules. Now, who here, we can clap for it. We are engaged and we are with each other, committed to a set of principles. Now, who here has been to any kind of child's sporting event? Yeah? Okay, so my favorite, I'm just gonna give you guys Bumblebee Soccer. That one's my favorite, where the kids are running around the field and they're all, circling around and they're all really close to each other. Yeah? Lots of supportive parents, grandparents, aunts, and uncles in this room. Have you ever noticed a parent that gets really upset at the ref? Like, so mad they can't control themselves, maybe they're yelling, maybe somebody actually has to ask them to leave. Now, in some languages, the word for referee is the same word as the word for judge. Now, referees are not always right, and neither are judges. But one thing that you can be sure about is that both referees and judges stand up for a job where they know that they're going to get yelled at, and they're gonna be asked to make some tough calls, to make some tough decisions. It might be easier in Bumblebee soccer, but in a Cat Grizz game, I mean, Grizz fans, raise your hands. Okay. So Doug raised his hand loud and proud right here. Now, here is my question. Do you got Cats fans in the room? Who wants Doug to be the referee? Probably not. Now, the thing is that this doesn't necessarily mean that Doug would be a bad referee. He might be fair. He might want to do the right thing in his heart. But we have to ask ourselves, do we want a person who's already wearing a Grizz jersey to be the person who's making the calls in the Cat Grizz game? I love somebody honest. He says yes. But what we also don't want is we don't want to see politicians in the judicial robes sitting in front of us and making the decisions about what is just and right in our state. We all have to be willing to give a little in order to have freedom. We have to be willing to respect the rule of law, to really commit ourselves to a system and a society where we have rules that we have agreed to. And when we have those rules, we don't whine about losing. Because sometimes we win, sometimes we lose. We make the best arguments that we can for the cases that are in front of us on the facts that are presented, right? We don't make decisions based on who is able to manipulate the system to their own ends. Now, all of this comes down to we have the most incredible Constitution in the country. I can say that with happiness. And what do we have? We have a right to a clean and healthful environment. We have an express right to privacy that preceded the guarantees set forth in the Roe v. Wade decision by the US Supreme Court. And we have a newly passed right to abortion that people of our state fully supported by a dramatic margin. We also have the right to hold our government accountable. We have the right to participate, the right to know. We have the right to check the excesses of power. We also have the right to pass referendums, to engage directly in government. It's not an easy job, but you all are here because we believe in being engaged. We believe in letting our elected leaders know exactly what we think. And we believe in upholding the Montana Constitution. And I have to tell you that I take that job very seriously. I see it as a sacred duty. It speaks to the foundations of democracy. It speaks to the incredible opportunity that we have to change the world around us, to create a better future for our children, to move ourselves towards a society that respects the rights of every human being in it. And on that note, I am more excited than I can possibly express to introduce to you someone who really does need no introduction, our former Attorney General, our former governor, and a man of incredible power and thoughtful integrity. I'm hearing integrity. I was going to say thoughtfulness, insightfulness. Our former governor, Mark Roscoe.
Well, good afternoon. So nice to be with you on this cold winter's day. How brave you are to brave the weather to come and talk about something that I think is one of the most critical issues that we could ever confront, either now or in the history of the state of Montana. Let me tell you, I promise to be brief. I know there are some skeptics in the crowd that is in fact possible, but I have worked very hard to make sure that I don't scramble this gathering in a way that's inappropriate. I'm going to start with something perhaps unusual, but bear with me. Sometimes it seems to me it's important to recall where we came from in order to discern where we want to go. With that in mind, you'll forgive me, I hope, for sharing just a brief recollection of our mutual history. For over 2 millennia of human history, our predecessors endured, by today's standards, unspeakable hardship, oppression, war, famine, and suffering, while trying to figure out a way to live with each other in peace and in freedom. From the law of the jungle to a variety of other tyrannies, the search for 2,400 years for liberty and prosperity was slow, grudging, brutal, and typically unsuccessful. In 1607, 104 migrants from England, seeking religious emancipation and political liberty, landed on the shores of Virginia with the intention of establishing the permanent settlement of Jamestown on the North American continent. For the next 180 years, 9 generations of future Americans, 180 years until 1787, when the Constitutional Convention was called, the American colonies lived without a national government, a constitution, and most importantly, without a Bill of Rights. Remembering the sacrifice of our forebears and ancestors who gave their lives to the cause of liberty and prosperity, I couldn't help but think how blessed we are to have the freedom to be assembled here, peacefully and together in this magnificent structure we all jointly own, freely speaking one another without fear, without regulation or tribulation. All of that and much, much more created, protected, and guaranteed by our constitutions. One other footnote. A democracy is a dynamic institution. It's always changing, but it's fragile, and it can dynamically deteriorate and rot just as quickly as it can dynamically improve. It's not imposed on us. We choose it. We choose it by the mutual promise we make to each other to faithfully support and defend the terms we've agreed to as defined and memorialized in our constitutions. Before entering upon the duties of his or her office, a legislator, and every other elected official for that matter, shall, according to Article 3 of the Montana Constitution, solemnly swear to faithfully support and protect and defend the constitutions of Montana and the United States of America. Taking that oath, the very first chore performed by our representatives, taking that oath is infinitely more than a ceremonial ritual. It is a mandatory precondition to assuming office. It also simultaneously is the making of a public promise and an affirmation of a sacred vow to be bound above all else to the preservation of the public good and the faithful execution of the duties assigned by the Constitution. It is plain then, as our legislators perform their duties, the imperatives of our Constitution and the public good must, in every circumstance, on every occasion, transcend and prevail at every turn over the stratagems or sleight of hand of political parties. So says the Constitution. It is, in my judgment, by design, and I believe pretty unanimous, that there is a purposeful dynamic tension built into our constitutions, whereby the powers of government are purposely allocated to different branches. The functional division of powers between the legislative, executive, and judicial branches provided for in the Constitution is the mechanism intentionally infused into our constitutions to prevent the concentration of power of any single institution, political party, or branch of government. The Montana Constitution provides very clear parameters and prohibitions concerning the separation of powers. The power of the government of this state is divided, as you know, into three distinct branches. No person or persons charged with the exercise of power properly belonging to one branch can exercise any power properly belonging to either of the others. Yet, in spite of those very clear constitutional prohibitions, some legislators have charged ahead with an unbridled enthusiasm and proposed 27 different encroachment bills that aim to strip, mutate, or diminish the powers allocated to the judicial branch. And why? Why? Because the decisions of our judges don't match up on every occasion with what those legislators who advocate want or demand. Just the sheer number of those judicial encroachment bills reveals an air of intimidation and a desire to punish the judicial branch wherever and however the sponsors can, as retribution for the members of the judiciary daring to do their duty in accordance with the Constitution and their oath of office. Clearly, legislators who cast their vote to remove or interfere with the authority assigned by the Constitution to the judicial branch do thereby betray their own oath of office as well as their pledge in public to serve the public. Likewise, if legislators set about to create an entirely new and arcane layer of courts in order to precipitate the verdicts they want instead of the verdicts they receive or they get, or they attempt to tarnish and limit the independence of the judiciary by transforming the nonpartisan election of judges and justices into partisan political affairs, they once again repudiate and abandon the virtues and the commands of the Constitution they've given their word to faithfully defend. Make no mistake, encroachment by the legislature is underwritten by an almost insatiable lust for power, control, and authority, the securement of which, history reveals, leads inescapably to factions, autocracy, and the disappearance of the constitutional order. For a democratic republic, It's a dangerous game to be played. We can fall apart much more quickly than we can come together. Thank you.
What great messages from our two speakers. What great messages. And now we're going to move on to our third speaker. We have retired District Court Judge Jim Manley from Polson. Judge Manley is one of the few Montana attorneys inducted into both the American Board of Trial Advocates and the International Society of Barristers. He retired as a Montana District Court Judge in 2020. Let's welcome Judge Manley.
It's probably not fun to follow someone like Riley, but at least I can go home to Polson and tell people I met somebody smart enough to go to Stanford Law School. And nobody ever wants to follow Governor Roscoe speaking. But in this case, it perhaps is good because it allows me to say some things about him that values he's lived that were shared values back in 1972. Every time you hear him speak, you are impressed with his decency and his civility, his intelligence, his integrity. Well, those were shared values, believe it or not, back in 1972. And they were a big part of the reason why in Montana's finest hour, they were able to create this document that is probably, well, it is the most respected state constitution in the country. It's studied by other states, it's studied in law schools. I'm told it's even studied in countries that are trying to create a democratic constitution. And you probably have heard the stories. In order to do that, Constitution Commission, the President, Graybill, directed that instead of sitting the Democrats and Republicans on opposite sides of the aisle, he seated them alphabetically. And so it happened that the most conservative and the most liberal conventioners, C.B. McNeil and Mick McEwen from Anaconda, were sitting next to each other. And I had the honor of replacing C.B. McNeil as judge up there in Lake County, and I used to sit in there and talk to him about the convention, and he said after they got to know each other, they were surprised at how much they agreed upon together and how little they didn't agree upon. And it was part of that spirit. I don't know if people know this. It's part of that spirit. The Constitutional Conventioners signed this Constitution unanimously. The most conservative, the most liberal, they all agreed on it in that spirit. And it's part of why it's such a great achievement, I think. There was also a darker side, perhaps, to this period in which the Constitution was crafted. Like in 1783, when the U.S. Constitution was crafted, the recent memory of an all too powerful tyrant form of government was in the room. Well, in 1972, I was going to the university in 1972, and like so many others of my generation, I just returned from the jungles of Vietnam where I'd been drafted and sent. And there were over 1 million of us there that had served. And so we too had a skeptical, I'd say healthy distrust of an overpowerful government that met and made decisions behind closed doors and lied to the public. And that was a big part of the impetus that resulted in this being probably, well, the strongest constitution in protecting individual rights, but also You know, people sometimes think constitutions give us rights, but constitutions are perhaps better understood as statements on the limitations of power and what are inalienable rights we have and which rights the government has to keep its hands off of. And because of that history, because of that environment, we have rights such as privacy, which was the first in the country for any constitution. It says, absent a compelling interest of the state, it's none of the state's damn business what we do in our private. We have the right to hold our government accountable. We can sue. They've waived sovereign immunity in this. We can sue our government for redress, whether that be money damages or to get an injunction to stop them from doing, or getting a writ of mandamus to require them, our elected officials, to do what they're supposed to do. In the U.S. Constitution, it had already been completed, and it was about to go around to the states or colonies, whatever, for ratification. And it became clear it wasn't going to pass because some of them were going to hold out until, or some of the state legislatures, until there were specific, specified rights, individual rights spelled out. And that was the first 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights. In Montana, our Bill of Rights aren't an afterthought set as amendments at the end. If you look at the Constitution, they're right there on the front page. They're the first thing that this Constitutional Convention went through. And there aren't 10 of them, there are 35 of them. And it's been a surprise to me how many people, including legislators, have apparently not even read the Constitution. We had recently an ex-legislator call it a socialist rag. And if you look at the Declaration of Rights, it's not hard to find. There are 3 different provisions. That is Article 2, Sections 3, 17, 19. Your private property rights are guaranteed. It's the opposite of a socialist rag. But perhaps the most surprising example was regarding the Equal Rights Amendment for women. And I think it was passed by Congress back in the late 70s, and I remember it was making its rounds for ratification by the requisite number of states. And when it came to Montana, it was debated here in these halls. And one of the legislators who opposed it stood up and said, look, if women are granted equal rights, families are going to disintegrate, businesses will disintegrate, and the sky will fall, etc. And he closed his argument by saying, if God had meant women to be equal, he would have made half of Jesus' disciples women. And that's how he closed his and he made national news with it. He at least got his moment of fame. But what's so troubling, I guess, is his ignorance. We have an equal rights provision. It's in our Constitution. It's Statement of Rights number 4. And it's been there for 53 years, and the sky hasn't fallen. We haven't been beset by a swarm of locusts. It's actually working pretty good. The separation, immediately after the Statement of Individual Rights comes the section that Governor Roscoe talked about, the next most important part of the Constitution, which is the separation of powers. And that is the biggest, perhaps, or the second biggest protection against an all-powerful government. But it also is for those who want to accumulate more and more power and more unaccountable power. it is the provision that is going to be most attacked and is being most attacked. And attacks on the popular Constitution haven't been greatly successful so far, although there's always going to be talk about having a new constitutional convention for those who want to accumulate more power. But because the direct attacks on our Constitution haven't worked that well, what's going on are attacks on those who defend our Constitution, such as a free press, such as the attorneys of the state, and especially now, the judges of the state. And there are 27, I guess, bills, and some of them are somewhat astounding. Like, there's one that says that government officials don't have to follow court orders. Well, that one was solved in 1803 with the most famous case of all, Marbury versus Madison. But also that they don't have to follow ethical rules, and then this is the most creative one and maybe interesting one, that if they're not satisfied with another branch of government, they'll just create that branch for themselves. So there was I guess it's been pulled this week for the Chancery Court, but it's going to come back in a different form. But what it says is the legislature will create a separate court, and it will decide on all constitutional issues, not the Montana Supreme Court set forth in the Constitution. And it will be made up of judges by appointment, not by election. And, you know, I can't conceive of a more obvious violation of the separation of powers doctrine, but it does lend itself to a lot of possibilities. Could the governor then say, well, I want my own legislature? So by executive order, could he create a separate legislature and say only they can pass laws regarding the government? And maybe the Supreme Court could decide that we're not happy with this governor, so we're gonna create a separate governor, and he's the only one that we'll listen to. And as absurd as this sounds, that's where we are right now. Our Constitution, which is the greatest achievement of the state of Montana, our Constitution is under attack, and it's under attack by indirectly attacking the judges of this state. And it's never been more in danger. Ronald Reagan said, freedom and democracy are fragile, and they are always only one generation away from being lost. And that's where we are now. I'm so happy to see, especially so many young people here, because it's time to get out and educate and activate and work. It's time for you young people especially, saddle up. It's your job now. You have the sacred duty of protecting this gift and passing it on to the next generation. Thank you.
Thank you so much to our amazing speakers. Riley Summers Flanagan, former Governor Roscoe, former retired District Court Judge Manley. Thank you. How many of you know Montana has a state song? Yeah? Well, I'm not gonna sing, that would be bad, but I'm gonna say the refrain, and if you know, feel free to say it along with me. If you sing, please. Here's the words. I don't need the words. Montana, Montana, glory of the West. Of all the states from coast to coast, you're easily the best.
Montana, Montana, where skies are always blue. M-O-N-T-A-N-A, Montana, I love you.
That is all of us. We all have a voice. We all have a responsibility to be participating and contributing and part of our democracy. It's not something we just hand off and leave it to them to do. We are part of it, and our voice matters. Your voice matters. Yeah. I thank you for being here. I encourage you to stop at all the tables around here. And I really urge you to get involved, stay involved, be involved. And now, raise your signs, raise your voices. Let's do one last refrain of "We love our Constitution." We love our